Fun fact, I was actually introduced to Jujutsu Kaisen through the character of Nobara. By chance, I saw a video absolutely praising her up and down, claiming her as a standard for badass women. Needless to say, I was intrigued, so I decided to watch the anime. I got off to a rough start with it, having dropped it after one episode due to how overpowered and generic the protagonist Itadori was. But after a while, I decided to give it a second chance. And I'm glad I did, because there were a handful of characters that I came to absolutely love, though unfortunately Nobara wasn't one of them. So with Nobara's story completed, I figured it was high time for me to talk about why I have such a strong dislike for the character, and why I believe Maki would have been much better as our female lead. Massive spoilers ahead for anyone who hasn't caught up to at least episode 19 of season 2. You've been warned. Now let's get into it. So let's start by looking at the basics, character motivations. Right off the bat, it is not looking good for Nobara. We know she really wanted to get away from country life because the small-mindedness and cruelty she encountered there sickened her. So my takeaway from that would be that she has a strong sense of justice. The problem is that that sense of justice, that inclination to do the right thing, to enforce that standard, isn't so strong as to set her apart from the average sorcerer. If it was, then she wouldn't be as callous or sadistic as she often is. So I have to question if it was solely about leaving her village, about getting away from that place that she found suffocating because it refused to tolerate anyone or anything that stood out from the crowd. I'm left speculating because what we were given is just so vague and generic, and her overall characterization offers no solid clues either. But if my speculation is correct, then that leaves us with more questions than when we started, because by the time we meet her, Nobara has already left her village and thus already achieved her supposed goal. So what's driving her now? If we're supposed to believe that Nobara is pursuing life as a sorcerer in order to ensure that she's never in a position where she'll be forced to return to her village, which is suggested by Nobara mentioning financial concerns to Itadori, then are we also supposed to believe that there were absolutely no other low to zero cost options for her? We only see her looking into other options once, that being in her introduction, and for the rest of the time she seems perfectly happy with being a sorcerer. So is there some other factor in Nobara making this specific career choice? Because if there is, we're neither shown or told what it is beyond Nobara clearly just enjoying fighting. And I like fighting is far too shallow a motivation to make for compelling characterization. Okay, I'll admit I'm willing to give her a bit of a pass on this, since as I mentioned earlier, our protagonist Itadori Yuji is also very generic when it comes to motivations. So the bar isn't exactly very high in this department. But another aspect I criticized Yuji for is his absurd power levels. So it'd only be fair if I did the same for Nobara. And Nobara happens to have the exact opposite problem as Itadori. She is so infuriatingly weak. Think about it. Ask yourself across 2 entire seasons, how many wins has Nobara had? You might list a handful of times. Now ask yourself how many solo wins she's had. You might say 1 or 2. I'd say 0. Now, let me explain. Your mind probably jumped straight to the iconic fight between Nobara and Momo when I asked that second question, right? Now, ignoring the fact that giving one of your leads only 1 victory across 2 seasons is pretty bad, made worse by the fact that most of the time Nobara doesn't even feel like a lead character, given how much screen time she gets compared to Yuji or Megumi. I do agree that this fight stands out for a reason. It highlights one of the most interesting aspects aspects of Nobara, that being her unconventional opinion on and self-expression of femininity. And the fight itself is pretty badass, until when Nobara is literally a split second away from victory, she gets KO'd by a cheap shot from Mai, and the episode moves on as casually as if that was the only logical outcome. And judging by the precedent set by Nobara's debut episode, I'm kind of inclined to agree that it was. I am fully prepared to state in no uncertain terms that Nobara has not a single indisputable solo victory, which again is pretty bad when on the other hand you have Yuji and Megumi reaching a point where they can take out high-level curses on their own. As a friend of mine put it, it's almost like the show doesn't want Nobara to be able to keep up with her fellow leads. And frankly, I wouldn't count her fight against Mahito either. Yes, she technically got him to retreat, but the only reason he did that was so that he could lead her directly into a trap. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself, so let's take a look at Nobara's other fights throughout the series, starting from the beginning. It would have been good to give her a solo victory in her first appearance, to establish how capable she is and why she'll fit right in with prodigies like Yuji and Megumi. Instead, the curse she's fighting takes a hostage, which puts her at a stalemate, so Yuji has to come bail her out. Disappointing, but I could let it slide if it's shown to be a rare occurrence down the road. It's not. In the next episode, Megumi has to bail her out of a fight and send her to safety. When tussling with second-year students, we don't even get to see Nobara put up a fight against Mai. The episode just jumps straight to the logical conclusion of Nobara losing, while badass Megumi gets all the spotlight. Then Maki creates a distraction to bail her out. In episode 17, as I already explained, Nobara loses her fight with Momo. You might argue that if not for Mai's interference, Nobara's victory would have been guaranteed, but I'm not counting almost victories. And frankly, I don't know why anyone would want to count this as a victory when Nobara's badass moment is so grossly undermined. In episode 24, Nobara has her first indisputable victory, though not before being bailed out of danger by Yuji. And again, it's a shared victory. On to season 2, where Nobara has her fight with Haruta, and fails so miserably that the person she was supposed to be protecting ends up getting stabbed multiple times right in front of her while there's absolutely nothing she can do. Then Nanami arrives to bail her out. In all honesty, these moments probably wouldn't be half so painful if the show didn't continuously pretend that Nobara is so cool while all this is happening. In truth, the very fact that the narrative insists on ignoring her monumental shortcomings is precisely why the character is so very frustrating for me. Because you can absolutely have a character whose weaknesses are a compelling part of their story. That's good writing. Imagine if the story did acknowledge just how far Nobara was lagging behind her male counterparts. Imagine if she was deeply self-conscious about it, causing her to push herself to the extreme in order to catch up with them and perhaps even surpass them. Maybe every time a companion of hers is injured, she takes all the blame on herself, using the memory of that failure to push herself even harder. But as it is, Nobara's failings seemingly only exist to frustrate audience members like myself and not to actually serve her character. But there is a star on the horizon, that being her fight with Mahito, where we discover that she's one of his natural enemies. And through fighting his double, she is actually aiding Yuji's fight against Mahito's other half. This is such a solid win for Nobara. I am not exaggerating in the slightest when I say her character absolutely needed this. And yet what happens immediately after we learn this? Nobara gets led into a trap and dies. Yes, we get the flashback first, but if anything, that makes things worse, because we only get that sliver of Nobara's backstory, which we already got in her debut episode, and it's shown completely through the perspective of someone else. So even when Nobara is supposed to be the focus, she still doesn't get the attention she deserves. Not to mention, because it's just a repeat of previously established information, the flashback itself adds nothing to her characterization. Furthermore, her final words are as follows.
悪くなかった。 悪くなかった。悪くなかった。
What? No, seriously, this cannot be it. Someone with as much conviction as Nobara would not go out with such a blasé note as, life didn't suck, I guess. I can't recall anything to suggest that Nobara thought it would. In fact, when people like Momo said, hey, living as a woman in the sorcerer world kinda sucks, Nobara said, that's stupid.
I don't have such weaknesses.
Nobara clearly loved fighting as a sorcerer. If anything, this makes it feel like the writers have even less of a grasp on Nobara's core character than I do. We know through Nobara's early dialogue in the series that she was perfectly fine with giving her life in fighting curses. To her, it was staying in her village that felt like a truly unbearable death. So why not have her remind Yuji that it's okay, she's fine with this? Or to highlight her confidence, she could ask Yuji to tell the others that she did good. Honestly, there are endless possibilities for what we could have gotten. But getting back to my point on Nobara being Mahito's natural enemy, this information is literally made pointless by the fact that they killed her immediately after. Thank goodness she's not entirely robbed of purpose, given how her efforts in the fight against the Cursed Brothers back in Season 1 helped lead to the surviving brother seeking revenge against Yuji, which led to Yuji being incapacitated in Shibuya, allowing Sukuna to return, which then led to Jogo's death and Megumi's survival. But again, that only affects Yuji and Megumi. So even when Nobara is pivotal to the plot, she's not important in the long run. She's just there to drive forward the male protagonist stories. And even then, she's only doing that for a fraction of her significantly lacking screen time. Typically, when there's a trio of characters in a story, though they may not all be on the same power level, each one will bring something indispensable to the table. If you look at the Harry Potter trio, Ron is an important addition because of his knowledge regarding the ins and outs of the wizarding world, something he gained from being born directly into it as opposed to Harry and Hermione, who were raised by muggles, aka non-wizarding folk. Hermione is vital because of her remarkable intelligence and magical skill, and I doubt I have to explain Harry's role. If you look at the trio from Castlevania, Sypha is a masterful sorcerer in a league all her own. Trevor holds all the knowledge and techniques of monster hunting passed down to him through the Belmont line, and Alucard is positively superhuman, given he's the offspring of one of the most powerful vampires in existence, and holds an emotional connection to Dracula which proves key in bringing him down. In both these examples, the contribution of the supporting leads is near constant. Take away any one of them and the rest would eventually topple. Now ask yourself what Nobara brings to the table. What is her contribution? And if you figure it out, please tell me, because I can think of nothing beyond that instance I just mentioned, where her assistance in the Season 1 finale helped bring about a series of events for the Season 2 finale. The very fact that Nobara is often taken out of the action, now made permanent by her death, says that one way or another, Yuji and Megumi can get along without her. Now, I've heard some people theorize that Nobara may be brought back in order to justify the reveal that she's Mahito's natural enemy. Frankly, I hope this is not the case, since I highly doubt the writers will handle her character any better than they have previously. But I'm sure you're wondering by now why I haven't mentioned Maki yet, so I'll address that now. As I said earlier, Nobara's failings unfortunately do not serve her character, instead doing her a disservice by fulfilling no function at all and just dragging the character down. But do you know whose failings do serve her character? Maki's. Maki can't use cursed energy. She can't even see curses. But despite that, despite her own clan looking down on her and her very own twin sister growing to despise her, Maki became a sorcerer anyway, and a damn good one at that. That alone speaks loads about her character. Her limitations drive her forward, and we can see they permeate every corner of who she is. She had to make the impossible decision of choosing to let go of her family, or else letting her failings define her for the rest of her life. She feels the need to prove herself, though on the surface she might describe it as spite towards those who only saw her as a disappointment. And we even see this go-getter attitude reflected in her quick and direct fighting style. On the other hand, when she's in a situation where she just can't cut it, we see her react with shame in that moment. Maki's weaknesses indisputably make her a well-rounded and compelling character. Now imagine her character being aged down so she's at the same level as our other protagonists, and getting to see all of her fascinating backstory unfold before our eyes, rather than being passingly revealed through flashbacks. That would be freaking awesome. For Maki, I'm interested to see how she'll find her way back from being brought so close to death in the season 2 finale. But for Nobara, honestly, part of me is just glad that I'll never have to see her on screen again. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that Nobara is completely awful. I actually quite enjoy her personality. She certainly has no lack of conviction or loyalty, and given her general stubborn and sassy attitude, I think she plays very well off Itadori, which provides plenty of humor for the audience to enjoy. I'm definitely curious to see if and how Nobara's death will affect Yuji in the long run. And as I mentioned earlier, Nobara's feminine self-expression contrasting with her more masculine approach to things is definitely a fascinating aspect of her character. Speaking of which, I actually did a video not that long ago talking about femininity and masculinity in female characters. So if you're interested in that, you can find it linked in the description. I'd also recommend checking out Esper's video on how Jujutsu Kaisen let down its entire female cast, though spoiler warning for those who haven't read the manga and are waiting to see how the show plays out. Ultimately, to me, the positive aspects of Nobara's character are exactly what make her such a major disappointment, because it shows that she had the potential to be great. And before you all rush to the comment section to tell me how much better Nobara is than Sakura from Naruto, a comparison which seems all too common for defenders of the character, allow me to nip this in the bud. Just because Nobara is better than the absolute lowest bar does not mean that she's all that. And if you want to say, well, it's shonen, you're expecting too much, then firstly, did you not hear me talk about Maki? And secondly, I'm not going to lower my standards for writing that could have easily been improved. But what do you think? Let me know in the comments below whether or not you disagree and why. And if you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a like and share it around. Also, if you're interested in seeing future content from this channel, hit the subscribe button. And if you're looking for more ways to show your support, consider becoming a patron. Link in the description. As always, massive thanks to those of you who are already patrons. Your support is hugely appreciated. Don't forget to stay loud and proud, folks. I'm your alibi, and I will see you next time.